Hello there and thanks for joining us. This is the Signature Show and I'm VinMartin, Obiora, Ilo. Not too long ago, over 50 heads of government coming from Africa were in Beijing for what was called the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC. Well, these heads of government were going there with the hope that they will get a part of the $60 billion which the Chinese president had announced was available for Africa to take. Our own president, President Muhammadu Buhari, was also at that summit and came back with a lot of goodies. He was also, during that summit, accused of putting Nigeria in a debt trap, something he quickly rebutted. He also said that going to China and getting some of this money was good for Nigeria. That is not our focus today. Our focus is China and Africa challenges of development. In the first place, do we in Africa need to go to China to scramble for this money? Looking back a couple of years ago, Africa, most African countries, we are on the same pedestal with China. And I have to interrogate this topic today. Former economic advisor to President Obasanjo. He is also the director of the Institute for Development Studies at the University of Nigeria. Professor Osita Ogbu will be joining me in a moment, so don't go away. When we return, there'll be so much to talk about.
My stake is that the economy, everybody is crying out, crying to God for remedy because what is on ground does not give hope. It's affecting the people, and when they hike those prices, people are incapacitated. Aspirants, the best might not even be produced. It should be brought down flat so that anyone can come and tell us what he has to offer. More people can key into the race and be able to tell us what they have to offer, and we on our own side we see more to make choice for.
I just want to say that it's all about personal interest. It's personal interest because I don't see the reason why a nomination fee, presidential nomination certificate would take up to 4.something million. For what? It's too uncalled for. I don't know what the political party are gaining from that. You know, all those things is just be falling on the masses. No matter how, it's the masses that is suffering on it.
To me, I see it as something that is not encouraging, and is a kind of killing the youth in terms of coming out to participate in political affairs. You know, like you know, the government, to me, what I'm seeing there is that they are trying to say to the youth they are not capable, or they are not given the right to participate in terms of political affairs.
They should reduce it totally. They should be so that the youth can also participate. We have our own rights now. Or don't you have your own rights? We have our own rights now. That is it. The economy is really, really bad. There is no job, nothing.
It's not fair enough for the youth, but then, are the youth ready? That is the question. Are they ready? The foundation is very bad. Like now, when you see what is happening, you discover that those who ruled before, when most of us were still kids, or maybe we were not yet born, are still the one ruling now. So where's the foundation for the youth? There is no foundation for the youth. If you go back the memory lane, you discover that Yakubu Gowon, when he was a military head of state, he was a younger person. He was at his early, either 20 or 30, during that period. When you check all the appointees that came out during that period, they were youths, younger people. You understand? But now, before you even graduate from school, you have grown past that era, that age, that those people occupy offices those days. You understand? So the chances of youth becoming whatever.
Very, very unfair because they don't want our youth to participate. They are displacing the youth. It's not supposed to be so. They are not carrying the youth along. The youth are suffering. The political issue, the leadership is not for the old anyway. They are displacing the youth. It's not good because the youth are suffering. They need to bring the fee down at least. Let the youth participate.
Glad to know you're still with us on the Sick Nature Show. And as I said earlier, my guest today is Professor Osita Ogbu, former economic advisor to President Obasanjo and currently the director of Institute of Development Studies at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. Prof, you're welcome to our show.
Thank you very much, Martin.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you, and I'm glad to be part of the Signature Show.
Thank you, sir. You know, a lot of African leaders are celebrating the Forum on China and Africa, the FOCAC that took place in Beijing, because for a lot of them, they came home with a lot of goodies in terms of loans and grants and support from China. But let's go back. Should Africa today be celebrating, you know, getting loans from China or from any other country for that matter?
VinMartin, you're asking a very important question. And it's a question that we really, really need to interrogate as intelligent and serious people in this continent. You know that not too long ago, in 1978 precisely, China's per capita GDP was $155, 1/3 of the average of sub-Saharan Africa, 1/3. And today, and in Nigeria in particular, was 3 times as much, was close to $500 in 1978, about $495. Today, China is 5 times our average. There were countries like Cote d'Ivoire that had a per capita income of $1,000 in 1978. So, China-Africa cooperation is good, but we need to interrogate, what did China do? What are we doing? Why are we where we are and they are where they are? It's an important development question to ask. And studying China, because really what China did was unprecedented. Growing their economy for 37 years or thereabout, consistently at close to 9.5%, close to 10%. 37, no country has ever done that. Annually. Which enabled them to lift 700 million people out of poverty. In fact, without China, there will have been more people in poverty today than there were several years ago. It's China and now India that is helping us reduce the poverty population. And as you have read in many reports, whether it is the Brookings or United Nations or the World Bank, rather than our poverty declining, we're actually increasing. We have become, as they say, the poverty capital of the world. And that should worry us. So China, they were very strategic in the things they did. Because in order to do what they did, the target, you see, sustained economic development comes from a particular source. You need to increase the productivity of your citizens. It is increasing the productivity of the citizens that you raise their income. So when you say everybody should go back to farming, that's not the answer. The answer is that you need to raise the productivity of farmers in agriculture so that the few can actually produce a lot for many. And in order to do that, you need to deploy science, technology, and innovation. So China was very clear. They used science, technology, and innovation to raise the productivity of their citizens. You know, I had the opportunity to talk to some people a few days ago, and I was explaining that there is what we call exploitation of backwardness, exploitation of underdevelopment. You know, the technology for making cars are now settled. You don't need to go and do research and develop it and then do innovation. These things are known. Technology for making air conditioners are already known. So there are so many things that are already in the public domain, which those of us who are economists will call that the production possibility frontier gives us the sets of this technology that countries can now exploit. You know, for developed countries, it's a lot more difficult because they need to shift that frontier. And in order to shift the frontier, you need to invest in research, in technology, new things. But for us, there are things that already exist. But incidentally, they exist for you to copy, imitate, adapt, adopt. But you have to have the capacity to even imitate, adopt, and adapt. China had the capacity. China invested in the capacity. So if you ask African countries, can you show us a world-class engineering facility, a world-class engineering faculty in a new university? What would be the answer? The answer would be maybe we don't have. Because we have not invested in the infrastructure that is required for us to take advantage of the technology that exists in order to raise the productivity of our citizens, in order to have sustained economic growth. And that is why our growth keeps going up and down, because it's tied to the production of primary goods still. So when the oil goes up, you will see us do well. Oil price goes up. I mean, if the price drops or dims, you will see us not doing very well because there's no sustainability, because it's not derived from a source that can sustain that growth.
Prof, let's look at the key word you used, increase productivity of citizens. Can you break it down for us? What should a country like Nigeria do, you know, seeing this huge gap? What can a country like Nigeria do to increase productivity of its citizens?
Agricultural revolution does not come through the use of hands and hoes. It comes from the use of knowledge. As one prime minister in Israel said, agriculture is 95% science and 5% labor. And he's right. How come Israel, close to over 70% desert, is producing fruits, producing vegetables, producing food and exporting? What did they do? They applied knowledge. Their soil is salinated. They have become a leader in desalination technology. Because of desertification, they developed drip technology, drip irrigation. So if you want to raise the productivity of your citizens, you need to invest in science, technology, and innovation that are relevant, that can enable you to translate, to download what already exists. Because like I said, China did not go to reinvent. What China did was, we have capacity, we build it, and we're able to use this capacity to copy, to imitate, to adapt, to adopt. You know, when the current government came into power, I wrote a newspaper article and I said, the president needs a chief innovation advisor. This is really what I had in mind. You know, the president himself is actually the innovation commander-in-chief. because technology-led development is actually a leadership endeavor. It is the leader that stimulates it. You know, when people say we want the economy to be private sector led, yes, it will be private sector led, but it is the state that directs even the private sector, that gives the enabler, that provides the enabler, that the private sector cues into. And China again, let's go back to China because we're discussing China. They have made use of their development banks. They had incentives that they provided for certain industries that are strategic for their development. And I've always said that, you know, no nation actually can reduce its poverty significantly without a booming and a huge manufacturing sector. So for us, for instance, the innovation, the technology we'll be talking about will be technology and innovation, not only for agriculture, because you need to raise the productivity in agriculture, because a lot of people are involved in it. Once you begin to raise the productivity, people will then migrate from agriculture to manufacturing. And then the manufacturing sector should be able to absorb a lot because it's also expanding. And so what did China do? Just like us. Sometimes we have these ideas, but whether we pursue them to their logical conclusion is another matter, because we also have export processing zones. But China had special economic zones. In this special economic zone, what did they do? They said, we don't have resources to provide infrastructure for, just like us, for everyone. But in these special economic zones, where we're going to innovate, where we're going to use knowledge, where we're going to create goods and services, not only for domestic consumption, but for export, we will provide infrastructure. We will give you roads, light, water, the things you need. So they became enclaves. These enclaves were where they now invested money that enabled these institutions, this private sector, to become competitive.
Prof, I'm not going to interrupt. I really would have wanted to interrupt you, but most of the things you've talked about China are also available here. We have a development bank. We have an economic bank. We have an agri bank.
Correct.
We have clusters of zones where, you know, the intendment would have been to provide all the infrastructure you talked about. Why did it work in China? Why is it not working here?
Good question. I think one is what I call the coordination failure. Coordination failure in the sense that sometimes I see the Bank of Industry going on a different trajectory, Bank of Industry on Bank of Agriculture on a different trajectory, SMIDAN on a different trajectory. So the institutions that are designed to support these sets of activities are not coordinated.
Why are they not coordinated?
That is...
I'm asking you because you are not just a scholar.
Yes.
You've also participated in governance.
Correct.
You were economic advisor to the president.
Yes.
I mean, on hindsight,
yes,
what actually is the problem?
No, I can tell you, one of the things I had suggested in some of the private pieces that some of us write is that even before a government sets in, and I'm hoping that we should learn that we should reorganize the institutions, because as soon as you appoint ministers become territorial. And so Bank of Industry is under Minister of Investment, Minister of Industry. Raw Material Research and Development Council is under Minister of Science and Technology. Export Promotion Zone may be somewhere else. So you have that. That's why I said coordination failure. And I have always thought that there is a need for that coordination. And remember, that suggestion of an innovation advisor who is just to remind the president that you are the innovation commander-in-chief, is to become the focal for coordinating these institutions to say, in the next 5, 6, 10 years, textile export, we shall be #1 in Africa. You have a set of targets, a set of things you want to do. So you bring these scarce resources around that same set of things. Not that institutions are doing their things, giving small loans here, giving small, and we tend to paint this picture that small is better than big. That's not what China did. I mean, they have small cottage industries, but they also laid emphasis, because part of raising the things you need to do in raising productivity is the scale of operation. You need to have a scale. How did Apple, why did Apple make Apple phone in China? It's an interesting story. New York Times in 2012 reported on that, because President Obama asked Steve Jobs, late Steve Jobs, why did you make Apple in China? As you know, Apple will normally announce when they are going to bring a product. And so the iPhone was announced, but at a future date. And a prototype was produced, which Steve Jobs took home, put it in his pocket, and he came back to the office furious because the phone has crashed with the keys in his pocket. And the story was that he was angry and told the executives that they must do things and get these things done. There were a couple of things that needed to be done and to meet the deadline. And one of the executives flew to China. And on getting to China, there was almost like a ready-made factory where they used to assemble other electronics for other companies. But that's not the story. That's part of the story. But the main story was that in 15 days, in 2 weeks, they were able to recruit 8,700 top-class industrial engineers to supervise over 200 workers. So Steve Jobs, the Apple, the response to Obama was, show us the engineers. If we were going to embark on recruitment of 8,700 engineers, that would take 9 months at least in the US. And I posed the question, how many years would it take? Do we even have them? So China did not go looking for Apple. Apple went to China because the facilities were there. The people have been trained. And these people, the workers are not just skilled, but they had the discipline to do 12-hour shifts. They lived in the hostels around the factory. So you're talking about both aptitude and attitude as it relates also to the issues of raising our productivity. But more, the government needs to do what it needs to do. Government has a role in addressing the gaps that exist in capacity, whether it is middle level or high level. And in addressing them, this is where you begin. That's why somebody wakes up one day and says, agriculture has improved overnight. And I said, when did you deploy the knowledge and technology? We should be paying attention to the agricultural research institutions and give them actually targets, because we have a lot of institutions, but these institutions do not have performance targets. Our institutions exist, but they are not challenged to be accountable. They are not. Every year there's a budget made for an institution,
and they don't have the discipline.
But like no one is saying, okay, in the last 3 years, demonstrate what you have produced.
So there's no monitoring and evaluation.
It's not just monitoring. You strict enforcement of policies. Strict enforcement. You see, there has to be this drive. But there is a second part to your question. If you take Aba Nnewi axis, Kano, Lagos, if these are production hubs, why are we just allowing the states to say there are no roads in Aba where they are making shoes? No, no, no. It's a joint effort. It's federal government, it's state, it's all of us. So if you see a hub, the development of China came from Eastern China, for instance. And so it is important to have a sense of nation. It is very critical. So that the pain of one is the pain of all. The success of one is success of all. So you will not therefore be minding where the things are coming from, where the development is coming from, where the products are coming from. All you need to do is to support, because if you develop shoes factory in Aba, you are invariably trying to develop the leather industry in Kano that can supply that
the leather needs
of Aba. So you have to have that kind of picture where you're saying, look, in the next couple of years, what sorts of technology. So when you're going to China, really, you should be going to China not simply to get money, but to get ideas, to find out these things I'm discussing, to find out how do you replace China. How did China become a capital deficient country just 40 years ago to a capital surplus country? Because you see, when you raise productivity and you have growth, growth will now lead to further productivity and then create surplus. It is this surplus that China now has that it is able to give countries loan and so on.
Sense of nation is something you talk about all the time.
Yeah.
But it's leading me to another question. Is it possible that why we have these ideas, we have industrial bank, blah, blah, this, that why it is not succeeding? Could it be our system of government? And I'm asking this because if you look at Asia, you find out that most Asian countries that did well, and at the time they did well, I'm not saying all, that they had something you could call quasi dictatorship, not democracy. China, that is the signpost of success, industrial, economic, and what have you today, has no democracy. It's a kind of something that resembles dictatorship. Could the system of government in Africa and other developing countries, could it be playing a part in the lack of seriousness in delivering on some of the things you've talked about?
No, it is not. Our democracy has a problem because the leadership recruitment process has significant problems. The way we choose our leaders, from local government all the way. Our leaders are not judged on what they deliver. I don't know any state governor who is running on, I have reduced poverty from 40% to 20%. I have increased school enrollment from 70% to 80%. I have reduced maternal mortality by this percentage. I haven't heard people running on these sets of statistics. In fact, the governors don't even address the statistics. They don't, it doesn't bother them. They don't bother them. So, you have to understand, since the subject is on China, the meritocratic nature of China. Meaning, you don't occupy positions you do not have the necessary qualification, experience, background, and skills. So it's important, and that is tied to that sense of nation. Meaning, when I set up an EPZ, am I just sending someone as a political favor? Or am I actually sending someone who is able to translate what EPZ is supposed to do? And therefore actively seek for how to make the EPZ work. So these things are important, that people are placed in positions and they are held accountable. So it's not a position of, I'm rewarding you for your efforts during my election. There are certain things you do to reward people for efforts during the election. But when it comes to strategic economic activities, you choose very carefully, because that's the lifeline of the country. So a sense of nation means I am going to look beyond my immediate constituency. I am going to look for the best people to man certain strategic places, because you can't give what you don't have. Experience has shown that. So that sense of nation, and you know, I gave a lecture on this sometime like last year on citizenship and national integration, and I think you and I talked
about it, yeah.
After the lecture, where I was still hammering on this issue, that part of the crisis of the nation is that you need to create the nation, that you need to bring everybody together, so that what is happening in the Northeast, the people in the Southeast will feel the pain, the Southwest will feel success elsewhere is success everywhere. So that sense, that unifying, that unifier, that bringing together is actually almost a prerequisite. And as for democracy, right now, I don't know whether there is a better form of governance, but ours has serious issues, because one is that poverty and democracy are distant cousins. And incidentally, our own democracy is not reducing the poverty, as we have seen in the statistics. So we need to reevaluate the things we're doing.
We'll take a break. When we return, we'll talk more on China and Africa challenges of development. If you're just tuning in, you're watching the Signature Show, and today we're focusing on China and Africa challenges of development. Our guest, Professor Osita Ogbu, former economic advisor to the president. Professor Ogbu, you know, we've touched on why Africa and developing countries have to still rely on loans from China, what they did not do, what China has done. But there's so much we have not done and what China has done that we still, you know, need to talk about. I was extremely interested in your talk about discipline. And that takes me also to the productivity you talked about. If you put 1,000 Chinese in a factory and put 1,000 Nigerians in a factory, do you think that looking at all the variables that you get equal amount of productivity?
No, I think you're pointing at a very important point. The issues of values and work ethics. And I think it is not unrelated to even the issues of sense of nation, issues of compensation, issues of complete reorientation. When we were implementing the needs agenda under Obasanjo, value orientation was a core pillar. And I think it should still remain a core pillar, that the young people taught a sense of how do you defer gratification, that hard work is a means to success. Because the society is sending a different sets of stimuli to the society, to citizens, that the end justifies the means, that the only way to become a wealthy citizen is through politics. No, these are false narratives, narratives that are real in our given set, but shouldn't be. And they are, because if you take the so-called jumbo salary and allowances that we hear, and sometimes have been confirmed, that a legislator could take close to over 10 million a month. This is what one of the senators said. And you compare that to a full professor at the highest rank earning 6 million a year. The other one is 10 million a month or more. This one is 6 million a year. So which signaling? I mean, the signaling is, we're not saying everybody should earn the same, but you can see the disparity. You see what you're telling the citizens. And so a sense of value orientation is extremely important. And you're right, work ethics, work that is rewarded appropriately, a minimum wage that is can provide a living wage. I mean, all these things are part of it. And a sense that we are all building a nation where, if I am not opportuned to fully benefit from it because of perhaps my educational level and so on, I am almost certain that my children will be. So you are not just creating for today, you are creating for the future. And so if one does not have that sense, and how does one get that sense? If public schools are not taken care of, where the poor can have quality education, if public health institutions cannot deliver minimal health services where the poor have access, then you are beginning to ask the citizens for things that they cannot relate to. So we need to do what we need to do. And that is why my emphasis has always been that we need to get the local governments functioning. We need to get the states functioning. Everything is not about the federal government. And those who, and if you get them functioning, then you can begin to support the argument that in fact you need to decentralize. You need to push things back to where the citizens are.
Let's look at some of the immediate controversies with the China visit and China summit.
Yeah.
A lot of people have said that these monies coming from China may actually put countries like Nigeria in a debt trap. And you and I have talked in passing about a debt trap. What could lead to a debt trap? So these monies that are coming in, I mean, looking at the agreements and looking at the way the monies are being deployed and to projects that they are going to be directed at, is there a genuine fear of a debt trap?
Yes, there could be, but and I hear that in some countries in Asia are beginning to experience that kind of trap. There's nothing wrong.
About Pakistan?
I think Pakistan, Sri Lanka, or Bangladesh, one of those countries. Pakistan, I hear, maybe getting to the brink of that kind of trap. The thing with loans, and I wrote about this again in the last regime, where I raised the issue of whether our debt and the level of borrowing also had not become odorous, in the sense that it seems like that the more we borrowed, the more poverty we are seeing. And so people must be conscious. What are we borrowing for? I know we have an infrastructure gap, no question about that. But we must sit back to analyze, first of all, the contract behind the loans, the agreements behind the loans. Because when somebody is giving you a loan, is bringing technology that they have, bringing personnel that they have, almost invariably, a huge percentage of the benefit of the loan has gone back to that economy. And what I tell Africans is that there is a difference between made in Africa and made by Africans. So as you are bringing new ideas, new technology, be sure that you are close marking in such a way that this knowledge and technology can be reproduced by you later. You can't continue to invite people to build your ports forever. You can't continue to invite people to build your rails forever. You can't continue to invite people to build your airports forever. You are therefore not going in the direction of developing. When you're developing, you are acquiring these skills. And that's why I keep going back to the engineering infrastructure, the human infrastructure required for development. If China builds our railway, are we able to maintain? Can we then reproduce the same railway without them? This should be at the back of our mind.
At what point do you take care of that? Is it in the agreement?
In the agreement, in the nature of the partnership, and when I was a member of the Federal Executive Council, one of the things I raised, and I keep raising, is that if I give somebody a contract to build a road, I expect more than a good road. I expect that students of civil engineering will be attached to the contractor.
For training.
For training, for learning the skills. Because we need to be able to reproduce the road. Even better. That's what China did. We invite you, we don't know how to produce this cup. But in 10 years, by the time you're leaving, we're able to reproduce this cup. So, the acquisition of technology is not a Father Christmas type of thing. So, loans are okay, provided. And, one of the things about trap, what we call debt trap, is that it's not the loan itself. It is also your ability to service the loan. But like I said, our politics is short term, which is also part of our crisis. A president has a maximum of 8 years. A governor has a maximum of 8 years. Now, in the first 4 years, the person wants to show how many roads I have built. So our politics is a politics of infrastructure. And so sometimes we're a bit careless in even the loans we accept. Because all we want to show is that I built X, Y, Z.
I built something in the first
Yeah,
year.
and by the way, sometimes we don't even mind the cost.
Or the quality.
Or the quality. But my point, more important point, is are we positioning ourselves to be able to reproduce those things?
To replicate them.
To replicate, to now, by now, we should be the leader in technology in the petroleum sector, in oil mining. By now, we have a Petroleum Technology Development Trust Fund, something like that. Nice institution set up for us to acquire the skills, the knowledge, the technology. So that if there is oil, they find oil in Chad, we should be going there, competing with Shell, competing with. So this is the way we must be thinking. That exploiting what I call the settled technology that is in the public domain, but you need to build infrastructure. So it leads me to what kinds of investments are we making in our universities? Do we actually regard the universities as centers of solution? As places where we can actually take our headaches to? Or are they just places where we train students? That's all. No research, no development, no innovation. And you can't do research and innovation without money. So if you go to Israel, the Hebrew University, for instance, is where the headaches are taken to, where things are dismantled and reassembled. In the process, you learn. So what is the nature of our curriculum? Why are we not able to attract the best brains back into the university? And it goes back to how much is a professor paid? When we were trained in this country, in first degree, we had lecturers from all over the world because salaries were competitive. they could come here even on sabbatical, even as permanent lecturers. But now, if you go to the universities, what do you have? You know, is either everybody is trained within the same university, or you have a few people from another university within Nigeria. So we have become indigenous in many ways, and that you are calling it a university, universal, a place that should accommodate knowledge from all over the world, a place where knowledge intermingles and not necessarily brewed in a particular fashion. So this whole thing requires, and by the way, all universities do not have to be at the same level. You can select universities and equip them to be able to drive your industrial revolution.
That's where your sense of nation comes in, because they want to do a balance, you know. They want to be sure that if they give a university in the north, it's given to the south.
No, but even if you want to do that, you can pick the first 6 universities that are spread geographically and say, each faculty of engineering, each science, you know, you choose certain areas of strength, and really is not, this thing is purposeful. It's not something you just say. It is something you do, and resources will be allocated and people held accountable.
One of the criticisms that we have seen, most times coming from the West, you know, and some people think it's peer jealousy, you know, when it concerns the West, is that the kind of loans that China is bringing ends up impoverishing the benefiting countries. Do you think there's some truth to this? Or does it depend on how each country handles that loan?
No, I think it depends on how each country handles that loan. That's why I said, first and foremost, you need to examine the details of the agreement. If somebody is coming, how have we designed the technology transfer agreement? How have we designed that they are not bringing technology that is inferior? How have we, how is the agreement designed in such a way that they are not importing all their labor? So somebody is building your railway, but your people are not actually involved in that railway. So what does that say? You can't maintain, you can't reproduce. So I think the issue of impoverishment is like AIDS, donor AIDS. You know, there are 2 sides to it. The way the aid is made, the preparedness of the recipient of the aid in interrogating the aid giver, in saying, I need help here, not here, and this is the way I need it. So you engage intelligently. But you know, in many of our crimes, we assume that the donor knows. And so the donor brings both money and knowledge. And we are not able to engage the donor intelligently to interrogate the depth of their knowledge of our circumstances. Because if you're wearing the shoe, you should know where it pinches. But you need to have people at the same level so that they can engage with the people who are bringing the resources. We've had occasions where we have said no to China loan because we didn't agree with the terms of that agreement. It depends on how the political economy of even getting loan and this speed with which people want to undertake certain projects, you know, may not allow for a careful analysis. But I've always said that you can't only look to the east. You also need to look to the west. There is a balance. It's interesting that Africa is becoming like a beautiful bride. I mean, both the west and the east wants to court Africa, but it is for Africa. Development is a national business. It is the leadership of a nation. And so conferences don't produce development. What produces development is a plan of projects and programs and activities that leadership has conscientiously articulated in a plan, and followed through over a period of time with people that are competent, people that can manage this, and people that can be held accountable. Once you do that, you begin to see incremental steps towards development.
Can African cooperation, can it help in, making Africa get out of this debt enslavement? What I mean by this is, could a level of intra-trade between African countries, help in reducing the reliance on aid outside Africa?
No, the reduction of the reliance has to come with the initial points we made earlier. That you have a sustained economic growth that is inclusive. And its inclusive nature will come from raising the productivity of the poor, whether they're in agriculture, and expanding your manufacturing base. So you need to revolutionize agriculture, you need to upgrade the industries, and you need to redirect resources from low value industries to higher value industries. Again, you're targeting productivity, sustained growth. Again, that leads to the generation of surplus, which China did, and that's why they're able to have money to be able to give to Africans. What trade does is that trade can provide you economies of scale, so that if you're a small country, for instance, you now have a larger market. Technology that might be so expensive for a small firm, a bigger firm can deploy because the market is huge. It can also provide the sharing of ideas between African countries, sharing of knowledge, sharing of personnel. If you're talking about world-class engineering schools, nothing wrong with other Africans being faculty in that engineering school, because each African country has a repository of very intelligent people, many of whom are even outside this continent, working and generating ideas for even the developed countries. So, there was a story told to us once by a Libyan who was headhunted by the Malaysians. He was in the US, and they heard about his exploits, what he could do and what he was doing, and approached him and said, what would it take? You're not even a Malaysian, but we need you in Malaysia. That same Libyan was telling us the story, and that's how he ended up in Malaysia. So when you find an African that can meet the requirements of where you're going with your goals, and perhaps you don't have your nationals that fit that same mode, they should be available to work here. And so regional cooperation must go beyond that we're just exchanging goods. We must also exchange brain, knowledge, intelligence, and bring Africans to begin to form a core of, what I call African freedom fighters, intellectual freedom fighters, that can use that knowledge to begin to liberate the continent, so that people are not rushing to give you aid or loan, but you too will begin to create surpluses over the long term.
Do you see a future where this whole thing will change?
The future will come when we have the courage to take the right decisions that may in the short term look like it's affecting us. The future will come when we liberate even the political space. When you go to a state and somebody conducts a local government election and wants to win 100%, not even allowing the opposition to win 2 or 3 seats, it tells you something. There must be courage in leadership that says, I am looking into the future, not short term, not 4 years, not, the Parliament of Finland has a committee on the future. On the future. Meaning, they analyze their circumstances, they analyze the things they produce and say, who are our competitors? Where will we be in 10 years? What will we be doing in 15 years? So courage in leadership means, in spite of what my immediate advisors are telling me, I'm going to break through because it's not in the interest of the nation. It's not in the interest of my state. I want to do things that others can build on. It doesn't matter who gets the credit. So there has to be that change in orientation, that this is a country, this is a nation. Each person that comes adds a building block to it. There has to be a sense, and this needs to be emphasized, that it matters who occupies certain positions. That you simply don't just post people to any place and expect good results. No. So if we begin to take those steps and hold people accountable, the future is there because, one, we have God-given natural resources, which we simply need to transform. Then we have the people. But VinMartin, we need to invest in our people. We need to invest in our people. The skills level, the education level, the curriculum. We need the boldness to address education.
Professor Osita Ogbu, former economic advisor to the president and director, Institute of Development Studies at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Prof, I must thank you.
Thank you very much
for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice talking to you.
Well, we need to build on human infrastructure to prepare us for the challenges of tomorrow. I am VinMartin Obiora. Thanks for watching. Don't forget you can watch this program again on signaturetv.com.ng, and you can also reach us on any of our social media platforms. Let's hear what you're saying. Let's know the topics you want us to talk about. Let's hear what you think about the programs we bring to you. Until next week, from Abuja in Nigeria, thank you for watching and bye for now.